Hi, I'm Brian Dunn, and welcome to the most important podcast ever. What makes it so important? It's not about me, it's about you. This podcast is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, the moments of resilience, the lessons learned, and the small acts that made a big difference. From retail floors to boardrooms, we'll share the untold stories that shape lives and careers. This week, our guest is Dr. Guy Beaudin for the third time in season one. And this episode is a capstone for our leadership series with Guy this year. Great news, spoiler alert. Guy has agreed to come back next year, but we'll pick up our quarterly rhythm and engage with leadership topics that are of interest to you. On an interesting note, I've gotten more questions and feedback and comments on the episodes with Guy than I have on any other episodes this season. And we've had a lot of great episodes. So this will serve as a capstone to our leadership series. And the core theme that we're going to explore tonight is the idea of maintaining your leadership capacity through recovery and energy management. Let's talk about all the challenges leaders face: complexity, constant demands, blurred boundaries, availability 24/7. Guy has been a longtime advisor to me. He's a longtime leadership advisor to many C-suite executives who I know he's helped. And I'll tell you, Guy expanded my horizon significantly, including helping me to learn to navigate the boundaries and the realities. So today we're going to pull back the curtain on something we don't talk about enough, and that's the inner game of leadership. Guy.
Hey, Brian, I'm super excited to be here again. And great that seems to be resonating with people. I believe in leadership. I believe in the importance of leadership. And if we can help to make a difference in people's lives through this podcast, then that's very, very meaningful to me. And this topic in particular is very near and dear to my heart. It's very interesting. When I start to work within you, executive, they expect I'm going to talk about, how to manage your team, how to manage the board or how to deal with strategy. But I always start with energy, recovery, and resilience, because that's the foundation of everything that you're going to do as a leader. And we sometimes forget in this culture of heroism today, where people just kind of push through one meeting after another, one issue after another. And I forget we're just human beings trying to do things, important things, difficult things with other human beings. So I like this idea that it's the inner game of leadership. I'm going to go really inner here, Brian, for just a few minutes. I'm going to talk about the brain, because that really is kind of fundamental to understanding what happens to us and what are the key principles in terms of recovery. And I'm not going to give you my whole neuroscience 101, because you're going to get a lot of comments, but not the right kind if I do that. But I'm talking about sort of two parts of the brain, which is basically the threat system and the executive system, right? And so you've got the threat system called the amygdala. That's your fight or flight response, right? It's constantly looking in the environment for any signs of stress or threat. And that is what creates anxiety, creates stress. And it's in direct opposition. It's in a tug of war with your executive system, which is the part of your brain where you make decisions, reasoning, problem solving, self-control. So all the things that you need to be a leader, to be in the performance quadrant, are in this executive part of your brain. But yet you've got this amygdala that's kind of fighting to really take all the energy from the prefrontal cortex. So what does it mean to be in recovery? Fundamentally, from a neuropsych perspective, it means quiet down the amygdala, quiet down your fight or flight system, so that your prefrontal cortex can get all the energy of your brain. And the thing about the amygdala is that it's pretty primitive and it's pretty stupid. So you won't understand the difference between a tiger is coming to attack me and Frank is sandbagging his sale forecast, right? Because those are both going to be perceived as threats for me. So to really be in recoveries, we're going to talk today about how do we quiet down the amygdala and how do we stay in that performance quadrant. So those are really some of the things I want to explore, but I want to give you a bit of the underpinnings of the neuropsych in terms of what we're going to cover here today.
It really resonates with me from my own experience. And it seems the more senior you get, the more that fight or flight can be triggered, because every situation you're in, you're always thinking, what's the best thing for the company? What's the best thing for me? What's the best thing for these people? Because you're only human. So, of course, you're thinking about all those things. And you layer on top of that the relentless rhythm of travel, the adrenaline required to scale a business, and the hidden cost of sustained intensity. Because every moment when you're the leader, you need to be on. It's an important moment to everybody you interact with. So it needs to be an important moment for you. And that requires enormous energy. Guy, there were times after a trip where I was going morning, noon, and night, or a week when I was in the office, I'd go home and I'd be exhausted. And I never really stopped and thought, why? And I did reflect often on the early counsel you gave me, Brian. Energy is a finite resource. And my level of understanding wasn't significant enough, I guess, that I really understood it until much later.
And I think, I remember those conversations you and I had, and I certainly saw the pace that you were keeping, which is really, as you said in your intro, the pace that many executives are keeping. And I think there's a couple of principles I want to land here. And one of them is, it's impossible to go to the performance quadrant without stopping by the recovery quadrant, because what you describe in your day, it's constant stress. You're either going to be in a heightened sense of stress, anxiety, or when things are going poorly, you're going to be pretty down and pretty depressed and maybe kind of down on yourself and down and lacking confidence. So those quadrants of, call them depletion, call them anxiety, you're going to be there a large part of your day as an executive. And people think they can go right from there to performance, but you can't. You have to pass by the recovery quadrant on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis to be able to maintain that degree of performance. But everything is conspiring against you being able to do that. Your calendar was full, right? From breakfast to dinner, and sometimes into your dinner meetings. And so, to me, the other point that you describe here very well, which is the brain is pretty flexible in both directions, right? So if you're constantly in a stress mode, it's going to be much easier for you to fall back into a stress mode. So, which is why, over time, your ability to recover is lessened if you don't sort of practice that recovery muscle. And so, there's, we talked about energy being a finite resource, time is a finite resource. And although we want to talk about managing energy, but not time, I think it does start with managing your time. And I know you and I talked about this. I really counsel all executives to do an annual calendar. What are the high points that you're going to really need to deliver on? What are the presentations you're going to need to make? Board meetings, whatever it is in your year, like map those out over the course of the year so you can plan recovery before and after that. And I work with the CEO of the Ford Motor Company for a couple of years, and he realized that his January, there was a board meeting, there was the auto show, there was a CES show, and he had to be on for like 3 major moments of the year. So he looked at his annual calendar and always managed recovery before and after those so he can be at his absolute best. So I always recommend do your annual calendar. What are the trips you're going to need to make? And in those, book the things that are important to you and to your family, because part of recovery is going to be what you're going to need to do for yourself and your family as well. So that's my first advice. Do an annual calendar so you can really start to look at your high points and map out your recovery in between those. And I know that was something you grew to do as well.
I think that's very interesting. I have a question. do we fall back into the stress state readily because it's what we know? Is it just habit?
It's your brain is building neural pathways to anxiety the more you spend time in anxiety. So why do people counsel things like meditation, which I'm not going to do here today, by the way, because those are probably not realistic. But what you're doing is try to build new pathways that are going to keep you in the performance quadrant. So your brain learns and more easily falls into that anxiety quadrant, which is really, as we go through some of the techniques here today, how to build new pathways that will get you more quickly back to the performance quadrant. But I do believe it
I
does start by managing your time. And one of the things that you did as well, although kind of doing it your annual, but look at your monthly and weekly as well. Those are the practices that you had every Sunday, taking an hour to look at your week, mapping out what are your high points, where can you build in some recovery, and what are the things you need to pay attention to from a personal or a family time.
Yeah. And I think it is so important what you're saying. And what I'm amazed at now that my life is not at the same level, the same pace, the same frenetic level of activity, it's so interesting how new purpose, this podcast, storytelling, and actively filling my heart with gratitude every morning. You call it meditation. Every day when I wake up, Guy, I spend the first 5 minutes listing off the many things I'm grateful for in my head. And it really helps me frame. And I'm not saying that to say how neat I am. I wish I had known that 20 years ago,
Yeah.
right? But it's a journey.
Yeah.
And for me now, and I think when you are balancing your life in this way or energizing yourself, it doesn't mean lack of activity. It could well mean activity. And I want you to tell me if you agree, but I think like I'm a Peloton fanatic. So I have to build streaks. I'm very competitive with myself. I like to travel. I love this podcast. I love people telling their stories. I love time with my sons, all that stuff. And so, what I want to ask you,
Yep.
if leadership is a marathon and not a sprint, which we've talked about,
Yep.
what does training for endurance look like for the long
So
run?
So let me give you, some examples of how I think about this. And you've described a couple of the things here that are really critical. So first of all, I think you really need to really believe that this is a marathon, not a sprint, and so you can't be gunning full time, all the time. And I'm going to talk about what you can do from a recovery perspective, from a kind of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual sense as well. And actually, you've given examples of all four of them. These right in your comments here. And frankly, I mean, the foundation of all this is physical, right? So if you're only going to do one thing in terms of managing your recovery, using your body to do so is going to be your most important tool. And that's really about three things: sleep, nutrition, and movement. And so I have an Oura ring now because I didn't think I was getting enough sleep. Turns out I'm not. Right? And so I'm really trying to work on that. Nutrition is critical, right? And so, and I know your days are busy. People kind of skip meals. By the way, I've never skipped the meals. I've had a few extra, but I've never skipped a meal. No, I mean, so people kind of get into this phase where, they don't map out those things. So on a daily basis, you should know, where am I going to get my meals? Where am I going to get my movement? Where am I going to get my exercise? And where am I going to get my sleep? So part of your plan has to be about this. And I mean, when I talk about doing something for yourself, exercising every day for an executive, to me, has got to be an absolute must. And there are good examples of, our prime minister just ran a 20-kilometer trail run. So, he's running every day, and he's, dealing with a lot of stuff, but he's making time for that. So definitely prioritize exercise, and movement throughout the day is absolutely critical. And I remember you were one of the first people who are doing these walking meetings, right? And I know you would sort of
Yeah.
walk around, the building,
Yeah.
and it turns out to be a very, very wise thing to do. It's hard to build in movement in your day, even if it is a little bit of walk around the office, management of walking around. But the first principle of recovery has got to be is a physical one. So that's number one. And you're doing it through your Peloton, through a number of other things, but to me, those are critical. On the cognitive side, I mean, a couple of things, avoiding multitasking. People are in meetings or looking at their phones. You're depleting your energy there in a very real way. So really stop and be in the meeting. By the way, your team knows you're multitasking, and that's sending a really clear message. So really make sure you're unitasking over the course of your day. But you've got to give yourself some mental breaks, like let your mind wander, listen to a piece of music. I mean, those things are going to be another form of recovery. Emotional recovery is largely through gratitude, and you've described it very well. If I have no time at all for recovery, I'm going to take two deep breaths, and think of one thing that I'm grateful for. And already you're going to quiet down the amygdala, and you're going to re-engage your prefrontal cortex. If you're feeling anxious, like name the anxiety, right? So, wow, this is interesting. I'm feeling anxious right now. And just by doing that, you're shutting down the amygdala and you're engaging your prefrontal cortex. The great thing about that, you can do it during a meeting. When Frank is sandbagging, his sales forecast, you're going to say, I'm really annoyed right now. That's interesting. I wonder why that is. And it's going to prevent you from, lashing out at Frank. And you're going to be able to more accurately maintain your self-control and figure out, what do I need to tell Frank in this moment to get him to understand that this isn't going to fly, as opposed to losing my cool. If you're losing your cool, the message Frank is going to get is, Brian lost his cool. You've done nothing in terms of getting him to understand how he needs to look at his forecast differently. But if you can engage your prefrontal cortex, don't lose your cool, think about, what does Frank need in this moment? It's going to allow you to have way more leadership influence and impact. And purpose is the last one I want to talk about, because you need to connect what you're doing to a higher purpose. So leaders who understand every day, why am I in this role? What am I doing this for? Who find a way to bring in purpose into the meeting. Why does this company exist? Why does this product exist? Why does this service exist? And getting people connecting back to that sense of purpose will give you is another form of recovery. So physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Those are the four ways you can think about recovery in your leadership mode.
I think that inner dialogue you talk about is so important, but it only can be beneficial, and I'd love your take on this. You've got to be willing and brave enough to be honest with yourself. And otherwise, you're just sort of spinning your wheels and playing into the anxiety, I think. I also think about the humanity of it. When you're the leader, you're not retiring your human emotions. You have grief. I had these in my career, grief, moments of great humility where I was brought to the water and forced to drink from the water of humility. And it seems to me in those moments, it's so important to rediscover purpose and leverage that purpose as a catalyst for that self-honesty, that self-awareness. So how do you help leaders confront the parts of themselves that get in their own way?
I'm going to talk about two things here. I'm going to talk about perspective, and I'm going to talk about locus of control. I mean, that sounds really technical, but
I think it's good.
The first thing is perspective, right? So you have to remember this is only one part of your life. And leaders get lost when their entire identity gets wrapped up in them being the leader. And one of the first things, again, I say to a new leader is, let's talk about the other aspects of your life. This is going to be 5, 10, 20 years of your life, but you have to make sure there's friends on the other side of this. There's a family, that you have a body that you can still live in, that's going to allow you to kind of do the rest of your life. So kind of really have the humility to get that perspective that say, this is only one part of my life. The other important thing about, the humility, not getting your ego overly identified with your role, is that the more it's identified with your role, the smallest thing is going to be perceived as a threat, which will ignite your amygdala, right? So if you think, oh my God, I'm VP of sales, and that's all I am in my life, and Frank the sandbagger is threatening my job, that smallest thing is going to be like a huge issue, and you're going to completely lose it because you're so closely identified to the role. So that notion of perspective and identity and maintaining other relationships in your life. So that's an important thing. People talk about it's harder for men, right, to maintain friendship. You've been particularly good at that in your life, but you've made an effort for that, right? You create the time and space for that to happen. So the first thing is perspective. The other thing is the locus of control, and that really is, and what is that defined at, is knowing that the outcomes in my life are a direct product of my actions and decisions. They're not about luck, they're not about fate, they're not about anything else. I have agency over what happens to me. So when I'm going to keep on poor Frank the sandbagger, right? But when Frank is sandbagging and you're losing it, if you're saying, at Frank, he made me lose it, you have no way of recovering from that. But if you lose it when Frank is sandbagging, you say, that's interesting. What did I not do in terms of my own recovery to make sure that I could deal with this moment in a more effective manner? So self-awareness for me in terms of recovery is about maintaining perspective and maintaining the locus of control. And by the way, the more you can consider an internal locus of control, which is I'm responsible for what happens in my life, that's highly connected to performance. And it's also highly connected to happiness. So if you catch yourself blaming others, blaming luck, blaming the fate, whatever, catch yourself knowing, whoa, I need to really think about, what attributions I'm making here and what impact that's having on my leadership.
It was a turning point, that idea of taking responsibility for where you are and who you are. Don't like your job, get a new job. Don't like your personal situation, get a new personal situation. I picked that up, and you're probably going to laugh, at a Covey seminar. There was lots I didn't use from that, but boy, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was up talking with this very demure executive, a lovely woman from Harley Davidson. And we were up telling our stories, and I talked about how I'd been a DM for 5 years and I couldn't get promoted and I had every reason. And she said, how terrible, sweetie, that all these bad things have happened for you and you have no role in it. And that just blew me away. And that moment did change. And I'll tell you something else. The idea of taking personal responsibility is empowering. It's unleashing. And I think two huge critical moments in my career were that moment where I realized personal responsibility, and I think connecting with you was integral to my success. I also want to tell you this idea of renewal. I love that, and everything conspires against that, doesn't it? When you're a leader, everything conspires against your personal renewal. And one of the things I have found in my life now is this podcast. And it's become part of my own renewal process. It allows me to reconnect with people, and it lights up corridors of my life that I haven't thought about in a long time. And I find it very enriching, and it drives me to do more. And I feel great about it because I'm reconnecting with meaning and community,
Yeah. And it's a great lesson, and one that can be applied. Not everybody has to start a podcast, but if you can apply these principles because what you're describing here is, curiosity and connection, right? Because it's maintaining your sense of curiosity, which is another form of recovery, like maintaining curious about the world, curious about yourself, and connection, right? It's one of the things that I didn't really kind of cover when I talked about what are the elements of recovery. Sometimes texting a friend or a loved one in the middle of a rough day is recovery
Yeah.
because it reminds you of connections that are out there. It connects you to another part of yourself, and it gives you a bit of respite from the onslaught. So, I'm not going to be. I want to be realistic about building recovery into your day because I know everybody is time poor, but most of the things I've talked about here can be really built into your day so that you can be doing recovery even while you're listening to the sales meeting.
Yeah, it's why I wanted to talk about this with you, because recovery doesn't have to be a 4-hour break. You can find moments that give you energy during your day, and it's such a smart thing to do. One of the things I used to do, I would disappear for 45 minutes and I would drive over to the Barnes and Noble near our corporate office because I loved being around books and I loved the smell of the books in Barnes and Noble. And it oftentimes gave me pause to, you know what, think through this. It's not as bad as you think. Let's go take care of this.
That's another interesting principle you bring up there because if you're in your prefrontal cortex, a problem is a challenge to be faced. If you're in your amygdala, it's a threat to be avoided. And what you're being asked to do as a leader is to go towards problems, not away from them. So the challenges that come into your day, you need to see them as a challenge, but you're only going to do that if you do some of the things we talked about, shutting down your amygdala and engaging your prefrontal cortex. I love that Barnes and Nobles. That's a perfect because you'll be picking up a book, you'll be listening to other things, you're engaging your brain, you're in your prefrontal cortex. It's fantastic. And you're moving, right? You're not sitting down.
That's right. That's right. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, if you find yourself in hell, keep going. And I'm reacting to your point. Avoidance is the worst thing you can do because invariably the things we dread, at least I find the things we dread or don't want to do, are never as bad as we think they're going to be because we build it all up in here. And a lot of times you get a burst of energy or you get a piece of learning you wouldn't have otherwise had. A lot of times we avoid things for irrational reasons, I think.
I think so. And but the underlying principle here is that your brain will find a way to take a break one way or another. And if you're not building the muscle about providing recovery to your brain, it will find a way to do it, either through avoidance, either through eating the wrong things, through alcohol, it will find a way because it can't go all the time. But if you're kind of building these breaks, you're going to be able to maintain, again, being in a performance quadrant.
I think that's very powerful. I love the idea. I hadn't quite thought about it that way, that your brain's going to find that break. So you've got to direct it so that it's constructive. Otherwise, it'll be just, you'll get the inverse.
Yeah. And it's going to seek the easy way out, right? It's going to seek the quickest path to give himself a bit of a break. So all these things here are helping to build that muscle in a very kind of positive way. And it gets a lot easier. And you'll find if you even start to practice some of these things that I talked about, it's going to be very, very natural to you. It's going to become part of your routine, and it helps you will rewire your brain by doing these things. It's the ultimate hack. It's the ultimate hack, Brian.
There you go. I love it. I love it. So Guy, as we close our series of leadership podcasts for season 1, I can't help but think about the power of awareness, of staying curious about ourselves as leaders and as people. And I have to tell you, not to get your head all pumped up, you helped me with that more than anybody. And really diving into yourself and understanding yourself, it's so empowering. And I know it can sound like bullshit bingo, but you've got to take the time to do that work.
I totally agree. And that always means a lot to me, Brian, when I hear those kinds of comments. And for me, it's so important to put this, as I hopefully did with you and with your listeners, into the language of performance. I mean, with all due respect to the wellness and self-care people, to me, there's components of this in what I'm talking about, but I'm really talking about how do you be a better leader? How do you mirror that to your team, which we really haven't touched upon here today, which we might do in another podcast, foreshadowing here, maybe something, because it's going to have an impact. If you're in proper recovery, the right energy, your team will feed off of that energy.
In fact, if you find your team de-energized, you need to go look in the mirror right away, because there's something you're doing that's driving that response. Listen, Guy, actually, I have one quick question for you. So your new prime minister was on the hike?
Yes, the new prime minister did a 20-kilometer trail run in the fall, in between, solving world problems and getting a new budget for Canada.
Well, Prime Minister Trudeau was on a yacht with Katy Perry, recharging his batteries.
Recovery comes in all forms.
I want to close this by thanking you so much for not only what you've done for me. I value you as a professional. I value you as a dear, dear friend. And I thank you so much for giving of yourself to our audience. And I look forward to having you back next season.
Me too, Brian. I can't wait. This is a great part of my day. It's a form of recovery for me, so I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad to hear that. And the crew here really wants you to come up to Alexandria and visit. I may have to make that happen.
We'll do an in-person podcast one of these days.
Yeah, I would. That would be amazing. So I close with a grateful heart to my friend, Dr. Guy Beaudin. I'm Brian Dunn. Thanks for listening to the most important podcast ever. Until next time, keep your head clear, your heart open, and your hands steady. Thanks, everybody.